It's something no one sees, but we all have. Implicit bias. Where does it come from? How does it affect our lives? It colors our decisions without us knowing. If we start a conversation, open our minds, and challenge ourselves to change, we might be surprised where it takes all of us. Join us for Hidden Bias of Good People, hosted by Dr. Bryant T. Marks.
Good evening. My name is Bryant Marks. I'm a professor of psychology at Morehouse College in Atlanta, Georgia, and also Chief Equity Officer at the National Training Institute on Race and Equity. It is a pleasure to be with you tonight to talk to you a little bit about implicit bias. Okay, so the title of our time, The Hidden Biases of Good People, Implications for Individuals and Organizations. We're going to go through a little bit of a journey. I'm going to challenge you a little bit on some of the science around implicit bias and some related concepts, but hopefully we'll have some fun in the process. All right, so let's get started. Now, when I start out my trainings, and we train all across the country, different organizations and entities and individuals, but we like to keep it engaging. So even though this is sort of me talking at you, so to speak, we can still interact in a form or two. So everyone looking at the screen, I'm going to flash an image on the screen. It's going to be really, really quick. And then afterwards, I want you to think about what you saw, your initial impression of what you saw. So everyone looking, it's going to be really, really quick. Here we go, real quick, real quick. What'd you see? Your initial impression. Now, many of you are going to say you saw a flash or a face, right? Now, I want you to tell me, was that face looking straight ahead or to the side? When you think about it, your initial impression, was the face looking straight ahead or to the side, right? So usually you get a mix, some folks saying straight ahead, some saying to the side, some may say both, but I want everyone to please look again. Do you see both possibilities now? Here's the deal, folks. Two people can look at the same person or the same situation and see something completely different. As a matter of fact, one person can look at another person or a situation, have an initial impression, and then have what we call an aha moment, right? Aha, I see the other possibility. Now, your aha moment, a few seconds. But in certain cases, it may be a few hours, days, weeks, months, or even years. It's all a matter of perspective. So a lot of what we're going to talk about today is perspective taking, not only from the perspective of you and your family, your community, but also elected officials and a variety of other folks who have a stake in this thing that we call implicit or unconscious bias. Okay? So this concept of implicit bias, unconscious bias, nothing new. It's been studied by scientists for close to 50 years. It's all about blind spots. For example, you may not have noticed, but in this leaf over here, there's a caterpillar sitting right on top of this leaf right here. Sometimes things are right in front of us and we do not notice them. Other times things are not actually there, but based upon our experiences and our backgrounds, we imagine that they were. We'll talk about both phenomena today. But the concept of implicit bias is an area of studied by social scientists close to 50 years. But in the last 3 to 5 years, I'd say, many forward-leaning organizations and individuals have had implicit bias training, okay, which we think is good. We being actual social scientists, we think it's good, but we do have a couple of concerns. Concern number one, some people may say, well, implicit bias, the training or the concept, right? Is it a fad? Is it a hot topic? Here today, gone tomorrow. Folks, not a fad. We're talking about universal human principles that have always been with us and always will be. As long as human beings exist, they will have both implicit and explicit bias, not going away. Other folks will say, well, does implicit bias training actually work? Well, that depends on how you define working. If working is about changing behavior, that is a process. Now, this could be the beginning of your process, the continuation of your process, but it's a process nonetheless. See, some folks will have what we call awareness training, where I'll raise your awareness. I'll give you the science, some definitions, the causes, the consequences, and they automatically expect their behavior to change. That is not how this works. Today, I'm going to give you some homework, some recommendations, things you can do. And if I give you at least 8 to 10 of these recommendations and you engage in them over time, consistently, whatever your implicit biases are should be identified, managed, and possibly reduced. But if you don't do any of them, then nothing will happen. So does this training work, implicit bias training? It works if you do the work, okay? That's how this goes. Wonderful. Now, a little bit about me, and I'll go through this really, really quickly. So I was born in the Bronx, raised in Queens. I'm a New York City guy, only spent 3 months living in the Bronx, so I did not develop a Yankee fanship when it came to baseball. I grew up as a Mets fan going to Shea Stadium back in the day, but this New York City reference point is going to be with us for a while, so I mention it here. My late father, who I miss dearly, was a Mississippi cotton picking champion and preacher. That's literal. My father was a sharecropper. When he was 15 years old, he hand-picked 412 pounds of cotton in one day. Folks, I don't know if you know how light cotton is, okay? Grown men can barely pick 200 pounds a day. He picked 412 pounds of cotton one day when he's 15. He's telling us the story, and I'm looking at him, and I'm saying, that seems excessive. You know, why'd you do all that? He says, well, whatever I was asked to do, I always did my best. And on that day, 412 pounds was my best. So he set the record for his county, making him a cotton picking champion. He was also a preacher, so I'm a PK. Anybody know what that is? PK, PK, PK. Preacher's kid or pastor's kid. Now, for those who don't know, there's different kinds of preacher's kids. There's the good kind and the not so good kind. I was a good kind. My mom, born and raised in Harlem, New York, a retired nurse living in Atlanta today. Okay, undergrad. So I attended Morehouse College. I majored in psychology and I minored in economics. Now, related to me being an economics minor, I had a barbershop in my freshman and sophomore dorm room while in college. Yes, always believed in multiple streams of revenue. Grad school, University of Michigan, master's and PhD in social psychology. Engaged in diversity, implicit bias research and training for over 20 years. I had 2 appointments with the Barack Obama administration. I was housed at the Department of Education, but I also worked with the Department of Justice and the White House on several projects, including My Brother's Keeper and the President's Task Force on 21st Century Policing. So I have trained a bunch of cops. I provided implicit bias training to over 2,400 police chiefs and command staff at the White House through a series of briefings. I've touched over 2,000 police departments, trained over 30,000 officers in the past 3 years alone, including the entire Los Angeles Police Department. On a more personal note, 3 of the 7 cars I've owned have been made by Hyundai. Next, I'm a huge Shark Tank fan, watch 1 to 2 episodes per day. I'm allergic to watermelon. Yes, a Black man allergic to watermelon. How about that? And finally, I was an MC/rapper. Now, for those who don't know, an MC is a more holistic entity, right? Rapping is something an MC does, but you can call me a retired rapper if you like. I was in the studio with Jay-Z before he was Jay-Z, when we were teenagers. I've also been a party hyper, spoken word artist, a teacher, a preacher, and a trainer. So why do I give you all this, right? Let's give you all my business like this. Here's the deal, folks. We all show up in a package. People look at us and they try to guesstimate our race, age, gender, that sort of thing, based upon what they see. What I submit to you is there's more to each and every one of us than meets the eye. And it can be summarized by looking at the outside package. Looking at me, you couldn't tell I was a former rapper or former barber. But those things could be central aspects of who I am, but you cannot see them by looking at my outside appearance. Okay? So we talk about the bases of bias. We'll talk about the visible bases, things you can see: race, gender, age, height, weight. We'll talk about that. But we're also going to talk about the less visible bases, your identities, your backgrounds, your experiences. And in many cases, the less visible bases of bias can be much more important than the visible ones. Okay? Wonderful. So I am a college professor, right? So we must have learning goals. So these are our learning goals for the day in the form of questions. Here we go. What is implicit bias? What does it look like in the real world? Why does it exist? How is it measured? And how does implicit bias affect the target of bias, the person or group on the receiving end? And finally, what are some problems and practices for managing and reducing implicit bias? So this is where we're going. Please keep an open mind. All right. Some of you might have heard of these concepts before. Keep an open mind. You may just come across something new. I will not be able to discuss bias towards all groups, too many groups. I'll take a deep dive on a few. You may or may not agree with everything that I say. I'm going to push you on some of the science and historical facts. And finally, deep work on diversity, equity, inclusion, implicit bias is usually awkward, messy, uncomfortable, emotional, and difficult. Folks, just accept it. It's part of the process. Probably means the training is working. All right. So now I'm going to take a little trip. Take a little trip here. Now, this is a mental trip. You don't have to pack any bags, but I want you to go through some steps in your head. If you ever get lost as I walk you through these steps, just go back to the top step and work your way down. All right. You can grab a little pen and paper, pencil and paper if you like, but you could also do this in your head. All right. Here we go. Pick a number between 1 and 5. Got it? Multiply your number by 9. If your new number is 2 digits, add them together. If it's 1, just use that number. Good. Subtract 5. Convert your number to a letter. So 1 equals A, 2 equals B, 3 equals C, 4 equals D, and so forth. Pick a country that begins with that letter. Take the last letter of that country and think of an animal that begins with that letter. And finally, using the last letter of the animal you just chose, think of a fruit that begins with that letter. I know you all are super smart, well-traveled, critical thinking people. All that being said, you're very unlikely to find in orange, kangaroo, and Denmark. Ha! If you're thinking orange, kangaroo, and Denmark, it's incredible. It's magic. I know. It's like, how do you read my mind? How do you read my mind? It's magic. I'm a scientist and a magician at the same time. But let's go ahead and break this down, how I was able to read your mind. Here we go. Pick a number between 1 and 5. You did that? No problem. Multiply your number by 9. You did that? No problem. But then I said, if your new number is 2 digits, add them together. If it's 1, just use that number. It will always equal 9. So everybody here with basic math skills should have been at 9. Then the next 2 steps became easy. Subtract 5, always equal 4. Convert your number to a letter, it will always equal D. So everybody here with basic math and literacy skills should have been at D. But then I began to lose some of you. I said, pick a country that begins with that letter. In the US, we always call it a Denmark bias, meaning Denmark, the #1 answer given by Americans when asked a country that begins with D. But some of you might have thought Djibouti, Dominican Republic, something like that. But if you said Denmark, still with me. Then I said, take the last letter of that country, think of an animal beginning with that letter. In the US, kangaroo bias, #1 answer, animals beginning with K. But some of you might have thought koala, or kiwi bird, that sort of thing. And finally, using the last letter of the animal you just chose, think of a color that begins with that letter. Orange comes to mind. Tell me this, what's another common color or common fruit that begins with the letter O, right? Letter O. Ochre, olive, in terms of colors, right? Fruit, kind of hard. So the notion is we've been overexposed to these things, whether it's Denmark, kiwi, orange. Think about it. In our American school systems, what are our children more likely to hear about? Denmark or Djibouti? Djibouti's great. I love Djibouti. Djibouti's wonderful. Unlikely to hear about it in our school systems, okay? Kangaroo versus kiwi. Kiwi bird, beautiful, little cute, little furry little bird. New Zealand, we get that. More likely to hear about kangaroo. So you see what we're saying? We're overexposed to certain things. Even if we don't have a preference for it, the exposure can lead to us bringing it to mind in situations like this. So here's a question for you. And I want you to answer this question in your mind in terms of society's perception of a particular group. Not what you believe about this group, but what do you think is out there, okay? So when Americans think of young Black males, what words or phrases do you think come to mind? Right? Just give it some thought, a few seconds. Again, not what you believe. What do you think is out there? Okay. Now, we've done, again, these sessions and workshops across the country, and we ask audiences this question. And on the next slide, I'm going to give you a sample of what's common, what we typically see across the country when we ask audiences this question. Okay, here we go. As you can see with word clouds, for those who don't know, the words in the largest font size, those are the responses that were given most frequently. So in this case, thug, criminal, dangerous, aggressive would be the most common answers. I need you to literally imagine yourselves walking through life with this as your personal brand. That when people thought of you, yes, you make it personal, they thought this, and what your life would be like. And I need you to sit with this for a second. You walk into the office building for the interview, this walks in with you. You walk into the bank for the loan, this walks in with you. You walk down the street past that police officer, this walks with you. Literally imagine if when people thought of you, yes, you make it personal, they thought this, and what your life would be like. Now, a few things. First, don't deflect. Don't say, oh, what about my group? What about, we'll get to other groups later. We just need you to be them for now. Even if it's uncomfortable, don't worry, I got you. Just be them for now. Also, this is not a guilt moment. I'm not trying to make anybody feel guilty. This is an empathy moment. Can you see the world through the eyes of someone different than you just for a moment and imagine what your life would be like? Also, please note, I did not ask you what you personally believe. You may not personally believe any of this about this group, but that wasn't the question. The question was, when Americans think of young Black males, what words or phrases, traits, or characteristics come to mind for them? So whether you know it or not, when you see a young Black male and categorize him as such, these traits get activated at a conscious or subconscious level. And once they are activated, they can affect how you think, feel, or behave. You won't even know that it's happening, and you're still a good person, right? Let's think a little deeper. Imagine people thought this about you, but it wasn't true. Imagine the psychic and mental energy it would take for you to live your life day to day, constantly trying to disprove this. No boss, I'm not like that. No teacher, I'm not like that. No officer, I'm not like that. No, I'm not, no, I'm not, no, I'm not. To be in a perpetual, ongoing state of trying to disprove people's misperceptions of you and your group. Folks, that can be exhausting, like a part-time job. You've been feeling it for what, a minute, minute and a half? You feel the weight of it. Imagine if this was the perceived totality of your existence, and it wasn't true. Yes, a subset of this is true for a subset of black males, but not the vast majority of them. When you look at the overall negative pattern, show me the data. You can't because it doesn't exist. I study black males. Empathy, not guilt. You see, some of y'all still feeling some kind of way right now, a little uncomfortable. Let me relieve you of some of your angst and discomfort. My team and I have done this exercise across the country over 700 times. I'm talking about all across the country, from Maine to Miami, from Seattle to San Diego, and everywhere in between. Here's a kicker. Everybody gives the same answers. Yep, everybody. Doctors, nurses, physicians, judges, black males themselves. Everybody gives the same answers. Here's the top 5. Across the country, young black males, dangerous, criminal, thug, rapper, athlete. Everywhere. Everywhere. Don't feel bad, don't feel guilty, right? But don't be naive. Because you say to yourself, well, how can that be? How can it go anywhere across the country with any audience and get the same answers? How can that be? I'll tell you how. Because everyone that we train across these United States of America have 2 things in common. Number 1, they live in this society. Number 2, they have a brain. And that's all it takes for implicit bias, folks. Those 2 key ingredients. You may want to write that down. Living in society, having a brain. As you live your life, you're taking in the world, you're taking in the world, taking in the world. From birth until now, you're taking in the world. Some things you take in repeatedly over time. Your mind says, I've seen this before. It locks it in for you. You will not know when it happens. But when it does, the seed for implicit bias is planted. It may blossom, it may not, but it's there. So don't feel guilty about this. This is not a reflection of your character. This is a reflection of disproportionate exposure. As you live your life, take it in the world. Some of us taking things collectively in common about certain groups, young black males. We see the same movies, same TV shows, same 6 o'clock news, same riot coverage. I'm not saying you believe these traits about this group. I'm saying you've been exposed to them. And when you are exposed to them, they're in your system. So they're in you, like they're in me, like they're in us. Folks, this stuff is in the air, and we're all inhaling. That's pretty good right there. It's tweetable, quotable right there, right? Pretty good. But the bottom line is not a character issue. Think about it this way. Implicit bias is much more about the machinery of your mind than it is the content of your character. That's pretty good too. So some key terms as we get into this. So what I just shared with you, these are what folks call stereotypes, right? Generalization about a group in which identical characteristics are assigned to all members of the group, regardless of actual variation amongst the group members. Now, stereotypes can be based upon one's gender, one's age, one's profession, and so forth. It's an internal mental phenomenon, meaning I cannot look at you and see the stereotypes you hold in your head. And this next stereotype I'm about to show you, you're not going to believe it. You all are sophisticated, critical thinking people. You are not going to believe this next stereotype that some people actually put out there. You know what it is? You know what it is? Some people actually do believe that New York City people are rude. Clutch the pearls. No. Yes, I know. Can't believe it either. In this case, New York City people, that's the group. Rude is a trait. Groups and traits. Stereotypes do not tell you whether you like or dislike someone or how you're going to treat them. It's purely cognition. It's information, association of a group with a trait. All right? Got it. Good. So when we define implicit bias, right, I wanted to give you that setup and that context, and I wanted you to feel it a bit before I gave you our formal definition. Here we go. Implicit or unconscious bias, same thing. And when stereotypes, which are group trait associations, affect how we think, evaluate, or behave in an unconscious manner. Now, these biases, which include both favorable and unfavorable perceptions, are activated involuntarily and without an individual's awareness or intentional control. So let's unpack this a bit. What is implicit bias? It tends to start off with an attitude or a stereotype, right? Association of a group with a trait. How do stereotypes form? Living in society, having a brain, repeated exposure, right? If you have thousands of these associations in your head right now, once they form, they can affect how we think, that is judgment and decision-making, evaluate or prejudice, sort of positive or negative attitude towards someone or a group simply based upon the group to which they belong, or behave, discrimination, positive negative treatment of someone based upon the group to which they belong. Okay? So essentially, in its essence, implicit bias takes the form of when a stereotype can affect how we think, feel, or behave at a subconscious level. That's the essence. You'll see many definitions, but those sort of elements will be present in most definitions. Right? Now, as mentioned, we all have biases, right? All have biases, all of us, right? Yes, you do too, okay? Now, some folks say, I don't have any biases. I treat everyone the same under every condition all the time. You absolutely do not. If you ever love someone, you show some bias. You ever dislike someone, you show some bias. Everybody in your life is not the same. But the impact of our biases on others does depend on the roles you play in society. So in any society, you have people in special roles. where if their biases play out, people's lives are impacted. Who are those people? Police officers, prosecutors, judges, surgeons, nurses, teachers, social workers, that sort of thing. You mean to tell me if one person could determine whether you get your kids back or not, you wouldn't want them to be unbiased? Right. So we have biases because we're human, but the impact can depend on the role we play in society, right? Okay. So we accept these two notions, we're golden. Folks, the framework I'm giving you here is clean, it is consistent. We are all overexposed to certain groups and certain traits, and certain groups and certain roles. Upon repeated exposure, a mind will lock in those associations. You will not know when it happens. When it does, the potential for implicit bias is established. Another question that we have related to implicit bias involves the following. I want you to think about where you grew up, right? So for the most part, where'd you grow up? Northeast, Southeast, Midwest, Southwest, West Coast, U.S. territory, another country. Where'd you grow up? Right? We had to think about it. Where'd you grow up? Okay. All right. Now, what can happen is, and we've done this, asked this question across the country, and we'll get a mix depending on where we are. But what can happen is people may not realize they can have regional biases, right? Meaning, say you grew up in the Northeast, somebody comes from the deep South, and you may have a bias based on how they speak, or how they think, or their culture. Even within the US, we can have regional biases. Okay? So the thing about this is I cannot see where you grew up. Although where you grew up has had a significant impact on who you are today, I can't see it. It's what we call a less visible basis of identity, which can be the basis of bias. Now, this piece down here, another country, most of the trainings that we conduct, there are folks that are there, that are immigrants, that are first generation here from another country. And that's good. We see that as an asset for the rest of the team, the rest of the organization, or the community. Why? Because you can learn from them. Folks, in all likelihood, in your personal life or professional life, you're going to come across people who grew up in other countries. Documented, undocumented, doesn't matter. People from other places. When you have a colleague or a friend that grew up in another country, you can learn from them. Why? See, intellectually, most of us born and raised in the US, we understand the immigrant experience, but we don't really know it, right? We don't know what it's like to leave your home country, friends, family, culture, everything behind, come over an entire ocean in some cases to a new country. You may not speak the language. You might be broke. Don't know how you're going to be having no money, poor. Don't know how you're going to be perceived or received, all the anxiety that comes with that. Most of us watching now, we don't know that feeling at a gut personal level unless we're an immigrant. But some of your friends and colleagues do. That's an asset for you. You learn from them. Don't judge a colleague. Oh, you're not really American. You didn't grow up here. You have an accent. Don't do that. Don't do that. Folks, you don't have the right or the standing to judge anyone else's Americanness. Yeah, let me unpack that real quick. I'm gonna give you all a little Morehouse right quick, a little something. No charge, just a little extra sprinkle, a little something to spice it up. Here we go. How can I do this? Okay. We're living in very interesting times, yes? We're living in times when some folks in the US are romanticizing the history of this country. They're saying things like, American exceptionalism and greatest country in the world and nation of immigrants, that sort of thing, okay? Oh, and by the way, that last one, nation of immigrants, that's not true. Yeah, if you are multitasking right now as I speak, please stop and hear what I'm about to say. The United States of America is not, has not been, and never was a nation of immigrants. That is factually incorrect. Look at the word immigrant or migrant. To migrate is a voluntary act to seek refuge, a better life on purpose with intent. When you say the U.S. is a nation of immigrants, in the same breath, you are dismissing the Native American experience and the African American experience. Why? Native Americans were already here. They were slaughtered or displaced. African Americans are brought here in chains by force to the worst form of slavery in human history. That is not immigration. Folks, this is not a matter of debate. It is a matter of definition. Look up the word immigrant and see if it applies to everyone. It does not. So from this day forward, if you continue to say the U.S. is a nation of immigrants, that is an integrity issue because you know better, but you're not doing better. And then the gap lacks integrity. That's on you, but it is factually incorrect. The United States of America is a nation of foreigners, with the exception of indigenous peoples. That is just a more accurate and inclusive description. See, some of you are saying, well, we're mostly immigrants, so what's your number? Because roughly 15% of the US population, not immigrants. About 12.5% Black folks, descendants of slaves, about 1% recent African immigrants, about 12.5% descendants of slaves, and 2.5% Native Americans, not immigrants. So what's your number? 20, 30, 40%? What will it take for you to use a more inclusive and accurate description? It is factually untrue, okay? How How hard is it to say we're a nation of foreigners, except for Native Americans, right? That's accurate. And if you go back far enough, Native Americans came from someplace else too. In the modern version, that's the case. What you got to find out about me, I am incredibly consistent. You can pull my videos up on YouTube. I was in different places in DC and everything, talking just like this. The U.S., not a nation of immigrants. But some people say, oh, but Dr. Marks, we like to say it because it sounds good. I don't care how it sounds. Tell the truth. The truth is, this country was founded on two original sins: genocide and displacement of Native Americans and enslavement of Africans. That's just the truth. Now, it's an inconvenient truth. It's an uncomfortable truth, but still true nonetheless. Don't romanticize this thing. Oh, you shelter masses, religious freedom. That sounds good. I hear you. That came after the fact. The original intent for this country in its genesis was economic. Rich European countries wanted to get richer. That's how this thing started. All that other stuff added on top. So let's put a little bow on this immigrant thing. If you are ever tempted to judge anyone else's Americanness, I want you to do two things. Number one, show me the Americanness test. Show me the criteria for who is more or less American, and then show me your score. Slippery slope, slippery slope. Second thing I want you to do, ask yourself, what is my American story? Because in all likelihood, somebody in your ancestry came over here from another country and didn't speak the language, had a thick accent, and they might have been poor and treated poorly, something like that. In all likelihood, that's the case. Do not romanticize your own past. Yes, you've been here 2, 3, 4 generations. Good for you. Now the immigrants here, you're going to judge them? It's just their turn. Your turn came 2, 3 generations ago. Good for you. What if somebody looked at your great-grandparents the same way you're looking at them? Nation of foreigners who came here under varying circumstances. We don't have the right or the standing to judge anyone else's Americanness. Got it? Good. All right, let's keep it moving. Now, some key terms I want to hit as we go forward, and you've heard some of these before. Diversity, right? Refers to those characteristics that make us different from one another, including race, ethnicity, gender, demographic differences, country of origin, culture, sexual orientation, age, values, political affiliation, socioeconomic status, able-bodiedness, and thought, that is, ideas and perspectives. Okay? All diversity is the ways in which people differ, period, full stop. Next, equity, providing individuals and groups with the appropriate resources and support for their particular situation that would allow them to experience similar opportunities and outcomes as other groups. Equity is not equality, that is giving everyone the same exact level of support or resources regardless of their situation. Equity is customized distribution of resources given somebody's situation or condition. Some situations call for equality. Everybody gets the same thing. Other situations call for equity. So we have diversity, we have equity, and then of course, inclusion, right? And the act of creating environments in which any individual or group can be and feel welcomed, respected, supported, and valued to fully participate regardless of their role and rank. You can have diversity, different colored bodies in a building without having inclusion. Another key term, racism, okay? The coordinated interaction of individual level biases, such as stereotypes, prejudice, and discrimination, with societal and cultural level biases, okay? This process creates disadvantaged and advantaged groups based upon presumably distinct biological traits, okay? Think of racism as a system of advantage based on race, just in a short form, okay? But I want to give you this definition because on this next slide, I'm going to break this down where we look at these different levels. So the levels of what bias or the isms can occur. Isms, racism, sexism, ageism, isms, okay? Individual level, that's one person. So in certain occupations, in certain roles, we must strive for zero tolerance for patterns of biases developed over time, even if it's one person. Okay? Next, organization, institutional level. A group of individuals within a department, unit, or sector, like a police department. Say 10% of police officers in a department have a negative implicit bias towards Asian Americans. You say, oh, okay, that's only 10%, 1 in 10, not a big deal. Really? Let's play that out. Look at the systems level. Collection of interrelated organizations working toward a larger goal. For example, the criminal justice system comprises police departments, prosecutors, public defenders, judges, juries, probation, corrections, amongst others. Imagine if 10% of the people in each of these organizations that make up the system had negative implicit bias towards Asian Americans. You see what's happening? See, the notion of systemic racism or systemic oppression, it gets a bad rap. Because for many of you, when you think systemic racism, you're thinking about it in an intentional manner. Like people got together and said, oh, we're going to hate those people and treat them bad. That's not necessarily how this works. You can have a little bit of implicit bias spread out across a bunch of people and it becomes systemic. What do I mean? Remember the word cloud? The young black male, dangerous, criminal, thug, remember that? We trained over 100,000 people in the last few years alone. Everybody gives the same answers. So it's in us, those traits, for one group, not in us for another group. Even if just a subset of people act on that bias, it can become systemic because society in the US, over 300 million people, even if just 10% act on it, that's still a lot of people. And it can become systemic. And it could all be good people, by the way. All be good people. Overexposed to groups and traits. Living in society, having a brain, repeated exposure. It gets locked in, they don't even know what's happening, and it's still good people. Then we have the ecosystem of bias, a collection of systems that influence the overall well-being of community members. For example, city, county departments. Right? You have the criminal justice system, the healthcare system, the education system, and so forth. So wherever you live, imagine you and your family, you go out into the world. You're engaging with systems. You go to the doctor, healthcare system. Go to the bank to get a loan, financial system. Kids go to school, education systems. So imagine if each of those systems and the organizations that comprise them viewed you and your family slightly more negatively than everybody else. What do you think your life would be like? Go to the doctor got bias against you. Go to the parent-teacher meeting, teacher has bias against you. You go to traffic court, the judge got bias against you. Just a little bit, but everywhere. What do you think your life would be like? And they could all be good people. Overexposed to groups and traits, locked in automatically. Okay? All right. So 4 distinct levels at which the isms or bias can occur. Now, when you're talking isms, it usually involves power. So you're really talking about these levels here, system and ecosystem. But the notion of bias can play out at all 4 of these levels. Okay? All right. Another concept I'm going to talk about now that may be a little uncomfortable for some, but as an educator, I feel I must address it. White privilege. Relax. I'm going to unpack white privilege in 2 minutes. Here we go. What is white privilege? Unearned favored state given to a white person simply based upon them being white. Okay? But it's a little more layered and nuanced in the US. What do I mean? For the average white American, white privilege is invisible. They won't even know when it's happening because it is simply a part of American life. The white person goes to the bank, they apply for a loan. They're quoted 3.1% over 30 years fixed. That sounds real good. They're going to close in 30 days. That white person does not know that the next day a black person came in, same credit score, same work history, same everything. They're quoted 3.3% over 30 years fixed. You say, oh, but that's only 0.2 of a percentage point. Not a big deal. Really? In certain parts of the US, 0.2 of a percentage point can be thousands of dollars over a 30-year period. You ask a loan officer, are you biased? They say no. Ask the bank, are you biased? They say no. And in their minds, they're literally telling the truth. That's what makes it implicit. Get all be good people, right? So we got to understand, for the average white person in the United States of America, they're just living life doing regular stuff. They just don't know that what's regular for them may not be regular for everybody else. And why should they? If I go into a bank and I apply for a loan and they quote me 3.1%, I don't hang out like, what you giving that person? What are you giving that person? I'm gone. So the average white person in America is living life, not necessarily part of some big, super grand white conspiracy. They sit down at a big white table with white people making white decisions about white stuff. Yeah, doesn't happen like that, right? Anymore, right? Today, right? But the notion is, do they benefit from being in that group? Yes. Is it a coordinated sort of conspiracy that's conscious and so forth day to day for every white person in America? Not so much. Okay. Now, some of my white friends will say, well, Bryant, you say I have this white privilege. What do I do with this white privilege? I tell them, you don't have to do anything. White people don't have to do anything to experience privilege. They just have to be in the US. Why? Because more positive traits are associated with white people in the US than any other group. Folks, that's just what it is. We could debate why, but just be grown and accept it. That's what it is. Okay. Even to the point where racial minorities will give white folks perks and benefits by accident because they implicitly associate positive traits with them. That's how deep this is. Okay? And then some folks say, well, if it's invisible as a white person, it's visible. I don't know when it's happening. I don't have to do anything about racial disparities. Nope. The invisibility of white privilege does not provide a pass for doing nothing regarding racial disparities. When you know better, you can do better. Okay, so we can all get in this fight once you are aware. Okay, cool. See, white privilege. Everybody good? Nobody burst into flames or exploded? All right, let's keep it moving. You have all types of biases and preferences, numbers, shapes, colors, that sort of thing. What's important is in the US, we automatically categorize others' race, gender, and age without even knowing it. The first time you see another human being, your mind is trying to categorize them according to race, gender, and age. Why is that? Our minds are built to be efficient. Thinking in categories is very efficient. If you meet somebody for the first time and they tell you they're a police officer, you don't have to ask them, do you have a gun and a badge? Did you go to police academy? It comes with the category. So once you know someone's category, a wealth of information comes along with it based upon your previous experience that could be helpful in that moment. And that process is usually pretty good, pretty efficient. But sometimes the information brought to mind doesn't fit that situation. Bias comes out, it's a bit awkward. We can get it wrong. Okay. Next, implicit bias and explicit bias don't always align. So you can have a negative association of a trait with a group, and at a conscious level, that not be the case. That's called dissociation. It is possible. Next, individuals can hold implicit bias toward their own group. That is very possible, again, due to overexposure. If I'm overexposed to negative traits about Black males, repeatedly, my mind may lock it in at a subconscious level. So just because you associate a trait with a group doesn't lock you into mistreating them or disliking them. You can do things at a conscious level that can cut the link between biased thinking and an outcome. And we'll show you what that looks like shortly. Implicit bias is a stronger predictor of day-to-day behavior than explicit bias because much of our behavior and thoughts are automatic. Some psychologists estimate 80 to 90% of our thoughts and behaviors throughout the day automatic. We don't process them at a conscious level, like your facial expressions right now. Yeah, I know. Finally, implicit bias is more likely when one trying to attend to multiple things, stress or under duress, under high threat, or tired or fatigued. Okay, so some conditions under which we typically lean on our implicit biases. Question for you. Of the following four categories, which one of these groups do you think are on the receiving end of the most negative implicit associations in the US? Women, African Americans, the elderly, the obese. Okay? If you had to choose of these four. And the answer is the elderly. The elderly. Here we go. Common biases and targets in the United States past 50 years of research. Most biases in the United States arise from external characteristics such as race and gender. So you have racism, sexism, okay? Also, Arabs and Muslims have been a common target of bias, particularly since 9/11. People overweight, common target of bias. LGBTQ communities, common target of bias. Undocumented individuals, common target of bias. But America's strongest negative bias is actually toward the elderly, followed by the obese, okay? So in the US, we have a pretty strong pro-youth bias. We tend to value the younger versions of ourselves and other people. We associate positive traits with youth, negative traits with the elderly, and that gap is pretty big. Okay? Now, what does implicit bias look like in the real world? I'm going to walk you through a few real-world examples pretty quickly. All things being equal, yet a bit unequal. Taller employees have been shown to receive higher wages than their shorter counterparts. Yes. And more attractive employees have been shown to receive higher starting salaries than their less attractive counterparts. So here's the deal, folks. If you're short, you better look good. All right, just keep it tight. You go to the gym, you can work out, you can be short and good looking, it can balance out. Folks, it's not me, it's the science. What else do we know? Qualifications being equal. That is credit score, financial history, income, etc. Blacks and Latinos were less likely to be approved for home mortgages and auto loans and paid higher interest rates on loans when they were approved. Right? Next. Previous performance being equal. Kindergarten through 12th grade teachers have shown lower expectations and display less social comfort with Black students and some Latino students than white students. Various researchers have found that over the past 50 years. People who show negative implicit bias towards Latinos are more likely to oppose both illegal and legal immigration. Hot topic there. Right? Crime and circumstances being equal. African Americans and some subgroups of Hispanic Americans are more likely to be stopped, searched, arrested, receive poor plea deals, convicted, receive longer sentences, receive a death penalty, decline probation, and decline a pardon. At pretty much every level of the criminal justice system, folks, race still matters in America. A review of 42 recent articles on implicit bias in healthcare revealed that physicians and nurses show bias in the areas of race and ethnicity, gender, socioeconomic status, age, mental illness, weight, HIV/AIDS, brain injury patients, intravenous drug users, disability, and social circumstances. All right, don't judge them. Don't judge them. We find these same patterns amongst you and I and the general public. But see, there's a romantic part of you that wants to think, oh, doctors and nurses, they can't be biased. Why not? Do they live in society? Do they have a brain? I mean, folks, that's your North Star. Just keep going back to that. It's going to help you out. Okay? What else do we know? Non-Blacks perceive young Black men as being bigger, that is taller, heavier, more muscular, and more physically threatening, that is stronger and more capable of harm than young white men. Right? So they've done all types of studies to sort of flesh this out, but I'm going to make this plain for you. A little example. I know football season is over in terms of NFL, but you can pull up an NFL game, just any NFL game from past season. Please understand, when you watch an NFL football game, you are simultaneously being overexposed to the physicality of black male bodies and the mentality of white male minds at the same time. What do I mean? You look on the field, what do you see? 300-pound linemen, 250-pound linebackers, running, jumping, smashing, grabbing, boom, boom, over and over again, week after week, month after month, year after year. Some people watch all 3 NFL games on Sunday and Monday Night Football and Thursday Night Football, 15 or 20 hours of football a week, right? Get that association. Then they cut to the side. What do they see? Head coach, white male, thinking, calling plays. Offensive coordinator, thinking, calling plays. The owner of the team had to think to own a team, and an analyst, by definition, are analyzing. Look at the race and gender of those people I just mentioned. Here's my hypothesis. Head coach, white male. Offensive coordinator, basically the number 2 coach, white male. Owner, white male. Analyst, white male. Folks, I'm not saying this is some big grand conspiracy. I'm saying the basis of implicit bias lie in the everyday creases of life. Not some big grand, you got to do that. You're just being entertained and do not know associations are being established and formed and built upon. Okay? All right? So when you look at this now, well, how would they say black men are big and strong? And look at society. Where do we see prominent black men presented? Oftentimes, their bodies are in the lead. Now, how is implicit bias measured? There's a few different ways to look at it. Among social scientists and in published literature, we've been pretty clever over the years, but a lot of it involves priming or reaction times. So I'm going to talk about that real quick. The one that's most popular and highly used is the implicit associations test. What is the IAT, as we call it? What does it do? It measures the strength of subconscious associations between concepts or groups, such as Hispanic people or gay people, and evaluations such as good or bad, or stereotypes such as athletic or clumsy. Now, the IAT is not perfect, but it does correlate with various implicit and explicit behaviors, okay? So to find this, just Google implicit associations test. It'll pop right up. The first 2 links will take you to a Harvard-based site. Once you get there, there's over 30 different tests you can take to see what implicit associations you have. To be clear, it's measuring the association of a group and a trait. It doesn't mean you're going to mistreat somebody or dislike them. It's just measuring the reflection or reflecting you living in society and having a brain and what gets associated over time. Another way to identify your bias, and I want you to do this tonight or within the next 48 hours. Talk to somebody close to you that knows you well. Here's what you do. Think about someone in your life right now who knows you really well. Spouse, significant other, parent, child, best friend, sibling. Okay. I want you to give them a pass to give you honest feedback about the biases they think you have. And then you listen without becoming defensive. Why? Because sometimes other people can see your biases before you do. They're around you, they see your patterns over time, they may be able to give you some constructive feedback. Okay? All right. So, how can implicit bias be managed or reduced? What can we do about all this? So, folks, this image you're seeing here, this is where I work. This is Morehouse College's graduation. Now, Morehouse College is the only predominantly black male college in the world. There are 4 all-male colleges in the United States: Hampton City in Virginia, Wabash in Indiana, St. John's in Minnesota, Morehouse in Atlanta. We are the largest at 2,200. The other 3 range from 8 to 1,200 students. They're predominantly white. Our alumni include Samuel L. Jackson, Edwin Moses, Jay Johnson, Julian Bond, Raphael Warnock, and most notably, Martin Luther King Jr. All went to Morehouse College. All right, in a commercial. But here's the deal. When I think of a young black male between the age of 17 and 23, I think this. I literally have to struggle to think of a young black male in this age category that is not a college student. I'm no better than you. I have just been on this campus for 17 years, overexposed to black male achievement. In my mind, black male equals achievement. They're synonyms. Folks, please understand. If you never step 1 foot on Morehouse College's campus, you need to understand intellectually that this place exists. That there is a place in this world where over 2,000 black males are getting together in a concentrated fashion, and it's not because they're in prison. Just knowing this place exists serves as a data point to counter the negative narrative that surrounds young black males. Just knowing this place exists. Some of you have never seen an image like this before in your life. A group of black males graduating from college with honor cords around their necks. Don't feel bad, don't feel guilty. It's about exposure. You've been exposed, okay? Remember earlier, the word cloud, young black male, dangerous, criminal, thug, remember that? Now I'm showing you this to offset that. So how do we undo implicit bias? Balance of exposure. And so it begins. We're gonna talk about some promising practices for reducing implicit bias, some strategies based on the following. Decision blinding. What does this look like? Removing the bias cue. How do we do that? Say, for example, human resources removes names from a resume before giving it to the hiring manager, which we know from the science that names on resumes can increase or decrease the likelihood of being called in for an interview. As simple as from going from Jose to Joe, or if somebody's Michael versus Malik, right? The ethnicity of a name can actually, if it sounds very ethnic, can decrease the likelihood of somebody being called in for an interview. So how do you do that? Take it off the resume. Folks, why do you need to know somebody's name to determine their fit for a job? That's irrelevant, right? Matter of fact, why do you need to see somebody's address on the resume to determine the fit for a job? Irrelevant as well, okay? So how can you sort of blind yourself from the basis of bias when making a decision? You could also avoid the bias cue. You can't remove it. Can you avoid it? What else can be done? Discretion and elimination. What is this? Objective standards for evaluation. For example, written materials, number deliverables, client evaluations. I use this example, Asian students in the math club. Say I'm a high school teacher, math teacher. It's the first day of the school year. My students are coming in one at a time. I see an Asian student. I'm like, ooh, Asian. Do you want to be in the math club? First day. No pretest, no math test, none of that. Just Asian equals math. That's not cool. So what do I need to do? I need to own it, right? Label the response as stereotypical and reflect on why it occurred. So how do I reduce the possibility of my discretion sort of coming in? How do I eliminate that? I can change my practice. What do I mean? I can say, okay, I'm not going to ask anyone to join the math club until after I get the first two math exams. I get the first two math exams. The people that score the highest across those two exams get the invitation to the math club. Clean. What did I do? I changed my practice. I didn't change my mind. I still associate Asia with math. But how I went about doing my job cut the link between biased thinking and an outcome. That's your homework. Homework. I want you to think about what you do at work every day and try to identify moments of discretion. Please write that down. Moments of discretion. Moments where your subjective experiences or your biases could play a role in the decision that you make or a task that you complete. And simply ask yourself, is it possible for me to go about making this decision or completing this task in a manner such that my biases are irrelevant? Just raise the question, okay? All right, what else can you do? Accountability. If you're being held accountable, you're less likely to act on your biases, generally speaking, okay? At the organizational level, you can have laws, policies, or practices. In law enforcement, mandatory body cameras for police. I train a lot of cops, okay? Not all police departments have body cameras, but what officers will often tell you is when the camera is on, it has a sense of accountability because like people are watching. So I'm not saying all cops are biased, but when you know that you could be held accountable if you act in a biased manner, if there's any aspect of you that might want to do that, you're probably going to think twice. Now, if it's implicit and automatic, it can possibly slip through. But if you get into the habit of saying, I'm going to go with my training, do things the way they're supposed to be done, being held accountable can enhance that. This is really good for you all in terms of what you can do as individuals. Book clubs. What do I mean? If you have a book club on certain titles related to race and bias and so forth, that could be great. Get 4 or 5 other people. You get together once a week, virtually or in person, and you sort of discuss that book chapter in a deep, reflective way. Another option is accountability partner. If you have some best practices on reducing bias, you can pick one other person, family member, or a coworker, and say, hey, let's hold each other accountable for sort of managing and trying to address our biases. You check in with each other once a week, on the phone, whatever the case is. You can have an equity coach. You know, some folks, you want to hire somebody, they can do that. Or an anti-bias journal. So once a day, at the end of the day, 5 minutes, had a good day today. Or had a tough day, I said this, it came across as bias, whatever the case is. Hold yourself accountable. So 3 different levels, folks. A group, book club, accountability partner, 2 people, or dyad, or an equity coach, an anti-bias journal, just you. Okay? Accountability. Another strategy, education. It's hard to hold deep biases towards people if you know about them in a deep way. Right? So education. Learning about positive achievements of targets of bias. For example, Black Africans actually being the creators of writing and mathematics and astronomy. Folks, we're just coming out of Black History Month. One of the worst things you can do for African Americans is to begin telling them their history, starting with slavery. Who else does that? Starts their history at deficit. Jewish people, don't start, European Jews don't start with the Holocaust. Japanese Americans don't start with internment camps, right? But with Black folks, poof, slavery. Not so cool. Black folks were around for thousands of years before slavery, doing a whole bunch of good stuff. They were the first to read, first to write, first to map the stars, built pyramids, did all types of great and wonderful things. If you understand all the contributions they made early on, it's harder to see them as unintelligent and not sort of worth investment. Okay, education. Also, understand the history of the targets of bias. Now let's talk about African Americans, the 400-year history of racism towards African Americans in this country. Folks, I know it sounds a bit hard and difficult, but as a country, we have to sort of embrace or understand the fact that American, Caribbean, Brazilian chattel slavery was the worst form of slavery in humankind for a variety of reasons. I wish I could go into it, but that's part of what it is. And it was the fundamental economic engine for our country being what it is today. I know that's hard to hear, right? But we can go through it a bit later. I'll give you some resources on our website that you can check out. And finally, mindfulness. So language, using language like, in my experience, I believe, or some. Why? Most of us do not have the data on various groups. So what you can say is, in my experience, Black people are like this. I believe women are like this. Some Latinos are like that. I believe, in my experience, some. Start right away. It's free. It'll be easy. Anti-bias reminders, things like screensavers, wristbands, t-shirts. On the bottom of your computer screen, take out a Post-it note and write, we live in society, we have a brain. Just write those two things down. It'll keep you grounded, right? But to reduce your bias, it's a marathon, not a sprint. It's an ongoing type of approach, okay? So as we get ready to wrap up with this last one, I want you to sort of continue taking notes and just think about which ones you want to practice. You want to increase opportunities for positive contact. This is a very, very well-researched strategy for reducing both implicit and explicit bias. Positive interactions with targets of bias can alter perceptions of the group or directly improve evaluations of that group. You want to seek opportunities to encounter and engage in positive interactions with our group members. More specifically, interact with and develop genuine relationships with several outgroup members. Try to get to the point where you can learn about the history and culture. Right? Let me put it like this. Some of you work in diverse workplaces, right? You go to work every day, you say, oh, we're so diverse. You look at the workplace and all of that. Some people want to receive personal credit for valuing diversity because they show up in a forced space like work. You don't get credit for that. It's cute. It looks good, but doesn't mean much. Why? I go to some organizations, into the cafeteria, self-segregation. Blacks over there, whites over there, Hispanics over there, Asians over there, like high school, right? And then they'll self-segregate whenever they can. You don't get credit for that. If you really want to know, as an individual, if you value diversity, the question is not who are you with in a forced space like work. Here's the real question. Who are you with when you can choose? Once you punch out and you go home, who do you live amongst? Who do you date? Who do you socialize with? Who do you grab a drink with? Who do you worship with? Who do you call when the chips are down? I'm getting a divorce. I'm leaving a job. How diverse is your inner circle of people when you're off the clock? Then we can talk about your value in diversity. You showing up to a forced space like work looks good, but doesn't mean much. Why? Because when most Americans punch out and we go home, we tend to be around people that think like us and look like us. We live amongst ourselves, date amongst ourselves, socialize amongst ourselves, worship amongst ourselves. The U.S. is a hyper-segregated country, residentially speaking. We go to diverse workplaces. Once we come home, we tend to be around people that think like us and look like us. So if that's the case for you, don't feel bad. That's the American way. I live in a Black neighborhood. I'm not going to sit down here or stand up here and be hypocritical, but I'm trying to expose myself to difference whenever I can. Homework. Take 5% of your downtime, just 5%, and expose yourself to difference. Watch a foreign film. Watch a documentary you wouldn't normally watch. Watch a cable news channel you wouldn't normally watch, for as long as you can take it. 5%, 5. The other 95%, you can be around people that think like you and look like you. Fine. It feels good. It will not reduce your implicit bias, but I get it. It's comfortable. But if you really want to do this work, diversity, equity, inclusion, implicit bias, please understand, growth is going to happen at the edge of your comfort level, not within your comfort zone. I just said something there. Growth is going to happen at the edge of your comfort level, not within your comfort zone. You want to do this work at a deep level, become comfortable with being uncomfortable. All right, folks, so I'm going to end it here. I want to thank you for spending the last hour with me. Hopefully you learned something, and this will spark some conversation amongst you, your family, and within your community. So here's our follow-up information in terms of contact. You see our website here, social media, some books that we would recommend. My book will be coming out this summer, so feel free to follow up as you see fit. Thank you so much for your time and attention, and have a great evening.